my levitation video?
No, do it when you come in.
Oh, okay, alright. Levitate. Now, unlike other levitation tutorials, this is not Photoshop heavy. This is not a course on, the absolute best Photoshop techniques to make your levitation work. Instead, I focus on in-camera and on-location techniques to make the shoots and your post-processing time as effortless as possible. So, it's important to remember, guys, that art above anything else is subjective. There is no right and absolutely no wrong way to do this stuff. It's about what connects with you visually and eventually what connects with your client base, your viewer base, whoever. But I have found, doing this for 2 years now, that there are some ways to make this easier for us as artists and for our clients and subjects. And I boiled that down to 5 simple rules of levitation. And we're going to start with number 1. Rule number 1 is establish narrative. The most important thing and most powerful thing you can do for your photo is determine what your subject's doing and why they're doing it. Once you have these 2 things down, it allows you to build and craft a scene around the narrative. For instance, is your subject flying? Are they falling? Are they being tossed through the air by an unseen force or whipped away by the wind? Those decisions matter because they're going to affect your subject themselves, their body language, outfits, ambient objects, all that stuff. Establish narrative is the first thing. Rule number 2. This is a big one because one of the major issues in levitation photography is what I like to call the copy-paste look. This effectively is when it looks like your subject has been plucked out of another image and just kind of like popped into yours. They don't quite fit in the scene. It doesn't make sense. So the best way to avoid that is using this rule, and it's always connect your subject to the scene. And I mean physically. Find ways to make them ingrained in the environment. That can be as simple as a shadow or a reflection, which is my favorite, or bringing their toes down, their feet, or their hands to grace the ground, even letting fabric drop down and fall and connect. Those connections are going to solidify them into the environment and make that copy-paste look completely dissipate. Rule number 3. This one I absolutely love and is super vital. Couldn't be simpler. And that rule is always keep your support systems behind or alongside your subject. We've all had these issues where we put someone on a support that's oddly shaped or too big, and it leaves an imprint of its shape on the subject. So always keep it behind or alongside. And rule number 4, create depth. This one is absolutely massive. Your scene, your photograph, think of it as if you're in the audience watching a play. And in that play, you have the foreground with, a little bit of set pieces. You have the midground with the subjects of the play, and the background, which is that stuff painted onto a backdrop. You want to make sure that your subject feels firmly inside your scene and not smushed on top of it or painted on the back. Great ways to do that include shooting with a wide-angle lens. Now, a wide-angle lens reduces compression and makes things far away look far, things close. Also, I recommend either side lighting or backlighting because when you do those, you gain what's called a rim light, and a rim light helps separate your subject from the background. I also shoot with a shallow depth of field, f2, f2.8, because same thing. Having your subject's blurriness match the blurriness of the environment, that's going to be a huge key to your viewer being like, ooh, yeah, that makes sense. They're definitely part of that scene. So finding ways to create depth are really, really important. And that includes even like color contrast or just regular contrast. Separation is key. You don't want them feeling stuck to or painted on. That's huge. Rule number 5 is everything you know about model communication goes out the window. Because in situations, let's say like you're doing a back bend, up doesn't mean up. Left doesn't, I don't know which way left is right now. Find ways to communicate that don't have directional cues. Think of, hey, look towards the staircase. And you're gonna be like, oh, okay, that's that way. Or like, hey, look towards the door. You're like, oh, that's that way. Actual visual cues and not directional ones are gonna be, oh God, I'm gonna die. So, using these 5 rules, I'm waiting for Kara to come over, and we're gonna do a small shoot. 2 photos. One of my classic cliffbangers and the other of a backbend. Really easy. And as we go through these shoots, you guys are gonna come with me, and I'm gonna walk you through, I utilize these 5 rules. Cool. So, we are up here on the cliff with Kara, and I'm gonna get one of my classic cliff levitation shots. And the first thing we do is establish narrative. What is the subject doing? Why are they doing it? And how we can make that effect sold to a viewer. Okay. So for this exact shot, what I have in mind is we have this really cool pathway right here, this little railing of sorts. I'm gonna have Kara not falling off of it, but actually walking along it. And as she walks, she's gonna take exaggerated leans off the edge. I wanna make it look like she's just balancing on one foot about to fall down. To really sell that walking effect, I can't just have like standing and leaning or standing and leaning. I need to make it seem like you're mid-stride and you're taking a big lean off, that kind of thing. So to really sell that, I think when people are taking like big strides or power walks, they're up on their toes like that. So all I have to do is incorporate this high toe with the lean. So I start with my feet planted, bring in the lean, bring a little toe up there and a high toe on the back leg. Confident gaze into the distance. Maybe bring the chest out. Now keep in mind that my feet are both pointed down the railing rather than back in my support. When my feet are pointed back in my support, it's going to be an indicator that I am supported. But when my feet are pointed down, the indication's gone. Cool, all right, let's try it. So now that Kara's up here, my next step is determining my viewing angle. This is done a lot of ways. Of course, to separate her from the background, I am backlighting her. The sun's over there. And also, I'm trying to include, my pretty landscape. This is different for everyone. Some people like clean backgrounds, some people like, jungles, whatever. This is just my personal preference. Don't necessarily take it as something that needs to happen. However, the backlighting is crucial because it does help separate her from those dark trees over there. So Kara's wondering where to put this hand, and I'm using it to actually block, oh, you're okay. I'm using it to actually block the carabiner. So in any event, when someone's like, where do I put this hand? Use people's natural elements to block obstructions like supports. Your body's great, your eyes are looking down the railing, but your toes are bracing a little bit against the rope. And to really establish that narrative, we wanna make it look like you're walking down. So try to keep your toes pointed down the railing. Perfect, love it. Good job.
Oh my God.
Not bad. Definitely tough though, right? Yeah, it's hard. So this stuff is the cliff stuff. I always say this, don't try this. I know I do it unless you have like, crazy rock climbing, mountaineering, that kind of experience, it is extremely dangerous. One mistake and people will die. Don't do it. If you do play with ropes, go to a climbing shop, get a tutor. There's people that lead workshops, and start on the ground. Go to your local dock, your local pier. Small is better, because you do not want to put someone up here unless you are 110% confident that you're not going to endanger them. So the important thing is realizing that while these rules are really easy on paper to be like, oh, checklist, I did this, I did this, I did this, it's incredibly difficult in person on location, because you're not only worrying about, the rules, you're thinking about client interaction, light, things that apply to photography normally.
That should be your entrance.
Guys, so we have made it to our second location, and the reason I love this one is because of the still water, and still water means reflections. Now, the reason reflections are so vital to me is because they are one of the most powerful connections to the scene, I would say. I love, touching fabric down. I love touching fingertips down. Shadows are great too, but for some reason, the real magic comes from reflection. So that's why we're here, and we're gonna do one of the classic backbends. Now, when I first picked up Levitation, I got like a step stool, like a step ladder. I tried all kinds of stuff, a laundry hamper, and they all sucked because they left these huge, stiff imprints on my model. This right here is a $20 drum stool. It spins, it's low profile, super easy to clone that stuff out, and it's cushy, meaning that when you sit or stand or whatever, it doesn't really make that big of an impact on your body. Hugely important. Also, backlighting, Kara, again, sun's coming from over there, and that backlighting is helping to create a little bit of separation in her. So you see how she's like separated from that background. One of the biggest issues I see, and definitely one that people encounter all the time, is that you can always tell there's a support. And that's because a lot of people violate that rule where you're supposed to have your support concealed behind or alongside your subject. Now, a great way to fix that, and literally the easiest thing ever, is this. We'll start with the issues first. Now, the problem we have here is that Kara's sitting kind of in the middle of the stool. And that means if we try to Photoshop, we're gonna get this, even if we take the stool out, we're gonna get this flat line right here, and it's gonna take liquefying, and it sucks. This is the simplest trick. All we're gonna do is we're gonna tell Kara, hey, we're gonna have you just move towards the camera a little bit so your butt cheek falls off the edge of the stool. Now, when we lift the fabric up, come towards me a little bit more and go backwards a little bit more. Perfect. So now, we no longer have that flat line. Instead, we have the natural shape of Kara's body, which, if you can tell, has come off the stool a little bit. Also means that the fabric now drapes down naturally. Pretty cool, right? Kara, go ahead, sit back towards the middle of the chair again. So when this happens, we get a shelf. And the shelf sucks because sometimes the fabric does drop down, but it hits this, and then it's so hard to edit straight fabric over curved fabric. So always have them just come towards the camera. All this stuff, all these little points are extremely confusing. So my absolute biggest tip is give your subject a job. Give them a task. Of course they're modeling, but they can also focus on other things. So when I start these shoots, I always say, hey, I'm gonna have you go on your back, you're gonna levitate, all that stuff, but I want you to focus on always being closer to me than your stool. That's the only thing you have to worry about. Now, if your client or subject is always thinking about that, that means one less job for you. Make sure they're comfortable with taking, jobs, but when you do and you can delegate and dictate, it means less work for you. So Kara's an experienced mom. That means I'm comfortable delegating quite a bit of this to her. Get a feel for your own client, but if making sure she's got her feet touching the ground to create a connection to the scene, making sure that her back is relaxed, that her hands are, doing all this stuff, it's a lot to think about. So, Kara, can I ask you that when you're levitating, when you're upside down, just focus on, no matter what, keeping one part of your body, be it your fingertips, maybe even your toes, touching the water. Is that okay?
Yep.
Cool. Easy. So that means a little bit less work for me because I have confidence in her and I can delegate that work to her and I'm not thinking about it while I'm shooting. So here's the thing. A big part of making this work, be it the cliff stuff or even the simple back bend, is getting your subjects to trust that A, they're not going to get hurt, and that 2, it's okay to fall over. And what that's going to do is that's going to allow for their body language to commit to the pose. So this happens to you a lot, where you get someone who's doing the back bend, they're positioning themselves here, and then they get about here and they freak out and they're like, ah, I'm levitating, and it just looks stiff, right? So when you get them to the point, and this means showing them yourself, before you ever make anyone try anything, do it yourself. Do exactly what I'm doing here. Be like, hey, it's okay. You're gonna feel yourself go totally upside down. Boom. And they commit. It's okay to fall. That's the idea. Right now, I'm all the way at 70 millimeters. Now what this is doing is it's creating a lot of compression and it's making it hard for me to tell that there's a big difference between, let's say, like here and back there. But as I zoom out and step in closer, my frame is similar, but I've created a lot of distance between my foreground and my background. So I love shooting these at wide angles, 24 to about 35 millimeters, because it helps really illustrate that depth. Kara, I'm gonna walk you through this pose. You ready?
Yep, let's do this.
Sweet. All right, so what we're gonna have you do is you're gonna slowly lower down into your back bend by getting onto your lower back. You'll find the sweet spot where you can comfortably lift your feet up and that will send your upper body down. Gorgeous, love it. Now there is one thing I'm gonna fix. You guys might notice that the stool is leaving a small imprint on the small of her back. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna have Kara adjust in 2 ways. The first is, see how there's a bit of gap between her back and the end of the stool? We're gonna ask her to actually scoot a little bit. Perfect, awesome. Now having that, we're gonna take some of the loose fabric.
Chris, there's a bee on me.
There's a bee?
Flick it off, flick it
Where?
off.
I don't see a bee.
Oh my God, Chris, just flick that
there's
shit.
a bee. It won't hurt you. Here, pull it out of my hand. There you go, buddy. Okay, the bee's okay. It's over there. I put it over there. Anyways, so our issue we were having is that Kara was a little too far towards the middle of the stool. So I scooted her over. And so now that Kara scooted over, we've got the fabric from the dress hanging right here. So we're gonna have you lean back. Perfect. Now to fix this gap, the gap is okay. We like that. We don't necessarily want too much imprint here, so I'm gonna minimize that by taking the loose fabric and pulling it over. We want just a little bit, but not too much. Perfect. Love it, Kara. So the next step here is I want you to make sure, just like we talked about, that you've got one point of connection with the ground. So bring that toe down on your left foot, perfect. And once you're there, I love it. Let the arms play side to side. Gorgeous. Right there. Epic. I love it. Important thing to remember, guys, is that when you're directing a model like upside down in one of these back bends, direction does not work directionally. So up doesn't mean up, down doesn't mean down, left and right are gonna be backwards for them. So give them specific points to look at. So if I'm like, Kara, look towards the beach for me, she's gonna turn her head towards me, or I'm like, Kara, look towards the ocean. So even when we're upside down, we know where things are, so don't worry too much about lefts and rights. To make this shot happen, Kara and I took the rules into account. The first rule is we developed the narrative. We thought about what she's doing, obviously. She's doing a back bend. It's a pretty simple pose. It requires no real flow in the fabric. Hair can be draped down if it wants to. It just needs to look like she's doing this crazy gymnastics thing on like a pinky toe. Simple. The second thing is we did want to establish connection to the scene. We wanted to make sure that she felt part of the scene, of the environment. We did that a couple different ways. The first, the reflection. Second is by having her toes or her fingers touch the water. And what that does is it creates the little ripples. And that way it's so hard for anyone to be like, oh, she was copy pasted in there. The third is we shot at a wide open aperture and pushed her feet away from the frame. And what that means is that you could really tell there's a certain distance between the front and the back. Super, super cool. So having those two down, we make sure that our support was concealed behind Kara. That, in this case, was extremely simple. We just had her push forward. I cannot stress how important that one is. It might be the simplest thing, and it might, be a quick fix, but it will save you hours in Photoshop. Do everything you can to make sure that the support is hidden behind your subject. As simple as just making sure their butt cheek sits off the end of their stool a little bit. Easy. Then, of course, noticing communication, taking time for me to get on the stool first and not only analyze what it should look like, but what it should feel like. This is really important too. When you guys practice this with people, don't tell them, oh, hey, you're gonna be upside down. Be like, no, you're gonna feel a pinch in your back. You're gonna feel the top of your head get wet by water, and that's okay. That's what you're looking for. These are strange sensations, and when these people feel those sensations, when they can recall you being like, oh, hey, that's what I'm supposed to feel, they're gonna be okay with it, and they're gonna be able to responsively push deeper into the pose. Cool. So you can build poses using anything you want, with multiple people, with ladders, falling out of trees, stuff like that. The idea is you want to make people feel connected to the scene, and also have a story to go with the scene. Cool. Also, guys, a fairly important thing is viewing angle. A lot of these levitation shots are shot from way up above. Now, if you take out the stool from up here, then it doesn't matter. It still looks like she's sitting. Now, if you go too low, then the problem is kind of the opposite. The stool is gonna have a much more pronounced impact on Kara because we're looking at so much more of it. So there's a sweet spot, and it seems to be right about level with the support, and that seems to work perfect. Go. No, Jesus. I'm trying to get beat. Oh my God.
So on to this edit now. Now, the point of all what we did earlier in the video is that every bit of work you do on location, the more work you do, the more planning, it makes your job in post easier. This entire edit is just going to be a little bit of color, a little bit of clone stamping, and that's it. Now, everyone's going to find their own color. Now, like I said, I'm not a huge fan of presets. It's not that I don't think they work, but it's that just... As photographers, we shoot in different environments, different color settings, and just one preset isn't going to do good on everything. So if you take the time to learn about, your colors, complementaries, triadic, and all that stuff, you can make some great color palettes with really a little bit of work. And I might post something about that later. Anyways, so my big issue is I don't love green, and I'm not a fan of it. So I'm usually trying to push it out by warming it up, desaturating it, bring in a little bit of sun flare from over there. Now, I tried a gradient at first, but now I'm using this special tool called Quite Sunny, where I just take a huge brush and I kind of very lightly feather it around the image with a little bit of warmth, a little bit of exposure. I think I'm going to go for it might be a little too warm, actually. Anyways, just kind of surveying the image. I'm going to have to go through... fix the rope along the dress and the bridge, but otherwise it's pretty clean. Check it out in Photoshop. Now, you guys might wonder, and I'll make a video or a little post about this later, is why I'm not using plates. Plates are, guys, if you don't know what it is, it's that second image you take of usually a clear or empty background, and you blend the two together. Now, the issue for me, guys, is that, first of all, a lot of these images aren't tripod accessible. I'm standing on a rock here. They're not places I can bring a tripod and get the same image twice. Also, I love shooting during golden hour, during sunset, and that if I get a usable image and then a plate, let's say 2 or 3 minutes later, the light and the exposure and the colors in both those images are going to be completely different, and that plate is pretty much useless. So I'm better off using the exact same image and just using the clone stamp. Now, the trick with clone is the most important thing is you need to avoid repeating patterns. People can pick that out really, really easily. If you use the same bush twice, the same line, same crack in a rock, it's super easy to tell. So if you look, I just missed two little gray lines at the bottom left-hand corner of the screen. I'm going to come back, fix that in a second. But those little details are what you have to look out for. Now, other than clone stamp, I use the pen tool a lot. The pen tool is great for using, for getting like curves, skin, that sort of thing, just perfect and not even noticeable. I love these new tooltips. So this is the new version of Photoshop just released today, actually. And this is the it's mid-October. So there we go. Fixing that line, just one of them though. And that's it. Guys, this is a 10-minute edit. It's incredible, and it's such a powerful technique to get it all right in camera so you can just have fun in Photoshop. Now for me, I'm just doing a little dodge and burning, bring out some contrast in her skin. Again, this is just personal preference, not something that has to be done for Levitation, but definitely part of my retouch workflow. Nice. Yeah. Fix the dress a little bit, bring out the jawline. I love, just adding a nice little bit of shadow to the neck, really pops the jaw. Incredible. Save it. Easy. Now, unlike the last edit, which was probably a best case scenario, minimalistic setup, this one, on the other hand, I've chosen because it presents a lot of the possible challenges we would face during a normal edit, assuming things didn't always go right. Now, this happens all the time, and it's okay. The reason, that we're going to have to deal with these things is because we're going to be focused on the pose, on the light, and sometimes stuff slips through. In this particular shot, the challenge is going to be the really, really heavy impact of the stool in Kara's lower back. There's a lot of black blended with shadow. It's taking up a lot of the space, so cloning from interior is going to be really hard. So we're going to eventually have to do a little bit of cloning from the outside of her hands and her feet, then blend those two clone layers together, and most likely have to liquefy her back to a reasonable shape, because when we take out the stool, it's going to make her look like she's really way too skinny, and she's already super thin, and we don't want to really make her look twig-like. So we're actually going to liquefy her a bit thicker on the back. So the first tool that I use is what's called the pen tool, and I think the pen tool is probably my favorite selection tool. It lets you make curves, pretty much like super subtle curves, just by clicking and dragging. Now, it's probably the hardest tool to learn, and the way I learned it is by using what's called the Bezier method. It's actually a game online. I'll drop the link below. Pretty much you just make shapes and doodles and stuff using just the pen tool. Took me a couple hours to really get comfortable with it, but I think it's the best one ever. So what I'm starting by doing is I'm taking the clone stamp and I'm doing my very best to clone color and detail from inside the gap in Kara's back, because that allows me to keep roughly the same luminosity, saturation, all that stuff. It also helps me, keep lines, that are there together. And just really importantly, the color. That's such a huge thing. I'm going to show you what happens when, we have to use color from different parts of the image to blend in. It's difficult, but not impossible. So here's the first step. I'm going to start taking blue from the left side of the image and then blending a little bit of pink from the right-hand side, trying to get a gradient going. This takes me a couple tries. And you notice too that we've encountered an issue where we've made the line on Kara's back way too sharp, way too perfectly round, and she's still way too skinny. So we're going to work on that in a bit. But for now, what I'm doing is I'm just using, after I made the selection, use the clone stamp, I'm using the clone stamp again without a selection to just feather the edge of that selection. I like it a lot. Okay, so the next step is we're going to fix this little dongle right here of skin, and I'm going to test it out by using the pen tool again, curving that, using the clone stamp, pulling it out. So I've got this weird nook. I have to take care of that too. But overall, it does look better than having that white piece of fabric sitting right there. So first thing I have to do is I'm going to take care of that nook. I'm going to do that by continuing to use the pen tool and create a curve that goes all the way from our upper back down to the top of the dress right there. Pretty much just finishing it out. It's an amazing tool, really easy to use. Oops, didn't make a selection there. There we go. Making my selection. Perfect. And then again, using the clone tool to feather it out. Looks a lot better. Now, selection's still kind of harsh and she's still kind of slim, but stool is gone. The hard part's over. Now we just get to work on the fine tuning, make it look presentable. All right. So we're going to liquefy, and I'm actually just going to just push down her back a little bit, bring back a natural back shape. And that might even be a little too slim. It's better though. I might come back to it later, fix it, maybe add a little bit more. Okay, now the biggest thing that bugs me right now is the left part of the dress, just that weird, perfectly straight line coming down. I don't know, we'll work on it in a bit. First thing we're going to do is we're going to fix that line on the back. I'm going to use that by using the Gaussian blur. Yeah, like a pixel or two, just because she's already pretty grainy, and she's kind of a little blurred out down there, so 1 or 2 pixels is enough to really help blend that back in. Created a black layer mask to hide it from the rest of the image, and then I'm painting white. Small difference, but definitely noticeable. Weirdly sharp parts of images take a lot of attention. Yep, you guessed it. Back to the pen tool. Just gonna try to find a natural line that exists in the dress. So I'm gonna use that shadow coming down. Use my pen tool to create some nice curviness. Go all the way around the end. And 1 or 2 pixels. And use that clone stamp, making sure that I'm utilizing the same lines that are, in the water next to it. So there's a ripple there. I try to bring the ripple over. That kind of thing. And then just kind of softening it up. I might fix this one a little bit more too. It's a lot better though. Got a little dark patch on the left, but let's fix these first. Bits of the stool. The hair doesn't make sense because it's like coming out of the shirt. So again, pen tool. So guys, I'm not a Photoshop pro. The reason this entire tutorial is the way it is because I don't love being in Photoshop. It's so much easier for me, and I assume some of you, to do this stuff practically. It just works better in our brains. In Photoshop, I really only use pen, clone, healing brush, and that's it. It's pretty minimalistic for me. All right, really getting there. All right, so let's go ahead and fix these weird black marks. These are just because I cloned a darker area over the lighter area, and I'm pretty much just blending. I have a low opacity clone. And just blending. A little bit of hair there. And the cool thing is, guys, you can rotate the clone stamp. This is the biggest thing for me. So I'll show you. I'm going to grab a piece of skin from over there. But you see how if I try to clone like from up here and put it down there, it's rotated differently, messes up the arm. So if you hold down Command Option and then your little arrow keys, like I don't know what they're called. They're what you make the heart with. Left or right, if you hold those down, you can actually rotate the sample which you're cloning. So it works great if you're like fixing fabric or skin where you have the right color and texture, but just not the right shape or angle. That works great. I love that. Then just a little bit of dodging and burning, bring out the light on her. Perfect. Crazy. So even worst case scenario, minimalistic tools and making sure you do things right in camera make your job a lot easier in post.